Gotta love a great little intro. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wiser Wednesday. For many of you, you'll recognize that little jingle. So look, really excited today. We're having a fireside chat with Chief Futurist Nikolas Badminton on facing our futures. So I'm James Potton. I believe in a world of entrepreneurial success without burnout, as I often say. So got the slightly charred t-shirt from doing it. Look, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here today, Nick. Welcome.
Thanks very much, James. It's great to be here.
Great stuff. Look, we met in your hometown, Toronto, about 4 years ago. And it was actually the discussion we had. Remember having a slightly crick neck because I don't know how tall you are, but you're a lot taller than I am.
Yeah.
You're about 6'5"?
6'4".
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm 5'10" and 3/4, and the 3/4 is
super important. All good.
So just remember that conversation and it just being like an amazing moment for loads of different reasons. It was the first time I heard about what a futurist was, and that I slightly orientate in that way, in the way I think that was incredible. I actually recently removed it from my bio, but I've added it in for today because
sure.
Hopefully you'll drag me on that journey again as a result of this discussion.
Sure.
Weirdly, we grew up 6 miles apart in the West Country. You escaped.
That's right.
Well done. You have an RFID chip implanted in your left hand.
Yeah, I was running a conference a few years ago. My friend Emil Grafstra from dangerousthings.com implanted me with RFID chip. It can't track me. It's not the sign of the beast, and it's fairly innocuous. So, but yeah, I'm a biohacker. So the journey continues.
Amazing. Okay, yeah, and you've had over 200 hours of tattoos. I don't know how you've done that, man. That's not even had one yet. So
well, I'm silly enough to do so.
There's a lot of body to cover there. So that would be my entire body. So look, we're sort of this is. We're just discussing this at a point when we've just had the paper signed by over 1,000 tech leaders saying that we need to hit a pause on developing AI beyond ChatGPT 4. Musk amongst them. Is this something that they want to catch up with? Who knows? Prompt engineers are now commanding up to 300K salaries. It can code for you. It can build a website in a few hours.
Sure.
Is B Corp gonna ban ChatGPT use? What's gonna happen? Where are we going? It seems like a bonkers time. In fact, AI is almost the most bonkers thing since either the internet or the printing press.
For sure,
it's amazing. So if people have questions, put them in. If you're listening live, put them in, and we'll look to answer them at the end for Nick. So look, tell us how you ended up being a futurist. Far away.
Yeah, we'll talk about being a futurist, but I'm going to weave in a little bit of my own experience with machine learning systems, artificial intelligence as well. At the age of 8 years old, I picked up a book called The Osborne Book of the Future. My father had bought it for me as part of a school book club, and it was about the year 2000 and beyond. So it was all these amazing technologies of, the Hyperloop was in there. There's wearable computing. Well, we've kind of got that today. Robots in the home haven't quite made that. We'd be living on the moon, under the sea, our futuristic cities and flying cars, the whole shebang. And it was interesting. When as an 8-year-old, I'm like, wow, wildly inspired by science fiction, wildly inspired by a book like this. And a couple of years later, I started programming a BBC computer. And so I sat down and started to work it out with my cousin and going through that. And I sort of began a lifelong love of technology and futures thinking. Now, I didn't call myself a futurist. I didn't even know what that word meant back then. I just knew that there was a horizon that I was looking towards. When I went to university, I actually did applied psychology and computing. I knew that cognitive psychology and computing language systems was going to be a big deal. So actually, my thesis was around using simplistic grammatical phrases to teach a single layer neural network how to recognize non-presented phrases. So linguistics, language, the whole shebang. Was thinking about going ahead doing a master's and a PhD in that. Wow. If I had have done, I guess I would have been part of that big club of AI today. But about 10, 12 years ago, I started talking about innovation and technology and futures of humanity and technology. And 10 years ago in May, I ran a conference called Cyborg Camp in Vancouver, and some of the listeners may have actually been there. We had 120 people fly from all over the world to my small event that I ran with my friends. Yeah. And it was a wild success. No one had really was doing these sort of underground discussions, so we were sort of bringing it to light. It was at one of these events. I had a microchip put in my left hand. I ran an event called From Now the year after, and that's where the futurist moniker sort of stuck. People started calling me it. So I embraced it, and I sort of ascended from my world of working in advertising and software and gig platforms into working for myself, consulting with companies, and really working out how you can apply sort of strategic rigor and strategic foresight within a corporate context. And that's what I've been doing for 10 years. So, futures work is incredibly important. It's basically been in my blood since I was a kid. I'm very focused. I wrote this book, Facing Our Futures. I wrote that during the pandemic. It was born of the pandemic and work I was doing with companies such as Google, the Bank of Canada, small startups, and a number of other engineering companies as well. And some of the frameworks and the research that I present in there is from the greatest thinkers in the world of foresight and some reference points. So it's kind of a good starting guide for people that are really excited about futures and want to apply it in a business sense. I've also got something called the positive dystopia framework in there that helps you look at positive futures and how we can get there, but also consider what happens if we make bad decisions. And that's something that I think has been missing in that world, because we're biased to basically want to see what's bad, or I call it looking into the darkness, right? So, that's a potted history of who I am from the age of 8 to today.
Amazing. Thank you.
It's been a wild ride. It's been super interesting. I feel blessed that every day I get to have conversations like this, connect with the community. And I actually think that community is amazing. You put futurist on your profile. Everyone on this that's watching this, put futurist on your profile. Go deeper. I don't care. I'm not precious about it. That tends to irk a lot of people in the foresight industry. But we're all here. The more people that can look at 10 plus years out, the better the world's going to be.
Yeah. Well, look, and that's actually, almost my next point. So that, you talk about the tyranny of now quite a lot, which is a really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a I find it super interesting, and I'm going to keep saying that throughout this discussion, because when working with startup leaders and companies that are still less than 300 people or whatever, they don't always. They're often their horizon is the end of their burn rate. There's this kind of right. It's almost a privilege to be able to look beyond that. So yeah, how do we try even begin to do that?
It's really interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had someone reach out. It's a founder of a software startup here in Canada, and they reached out. They're like, "Hey, I saw you speak at a PricewaterhouseCoopers event last year. I think we could do some cool work. I can get the government to pay for this. There's some really good, startup support programs in Canada." And we sat down, and I said, started to ask questions about the business and the focus. And this founder knew that, they were sort of looking in the short term what they could do in terms of their business, where they were likely to go, how to sort of mobilize knowledge from their board members and advisors and whatever. I asked a very simple question. It's like, what's your 20-year vision? And his vision was 3-4 years, let's spin it out, sell it, and move on. It's like, okay. Yeah. People don't buy that. Okay. And it's interesting. People actually believe and buy from companies that do have a longer term vision. They do have a sense of future preparedness. There's studies that show that if you've got future preparedness and vigilance in your business, whatever size it is, you're more profitable and you grow faster than people that don't. So, be a part of the story of our futures rather than a bystander, just watching everyone else take advantage. Yeah. So I worked with this person and his team, and I worked with the board of directors, and we did some training just to give them some awareness and future preparedness, doing some signals analysis, trend identification, and scenario building. And within 2 to 3 months of that, and some extra work that we did together, Their vision was more clear. They had this idea where they were going in the next 20 years. They replaced half their board and their advisors. They brought it in. The company's on fire. The guy span off a venture fund. It became this thing that once you had that bigger view of what's coming, once you can start to see the opportunities flying over the horizon, or you can start to seed the conversations. And there's nothing more potent than inspiring people with visions of a future that they can feel that they're part of. Because the thing that stops us from thinking about futures is that once we start saying, okay, James, imagine yourself in 20 years' time. You're not thinking about yourself. You think it's someone completely different. I mean, psychologically, we just can't understand it. So as futurists, what we do is we help people understand that there's a journey, who they are in those contexts. And this is where scenarios and storytelling sort of comes in. And it's like, I know who I am in that future. I know how it feels. I know the dynamics. I know the effects. And I know potentially how we get to there from today. And then it's like, wow, actually, there's some ideas that we've played with that are really relevant to the business today. Change up your business model. Think about technology differently. Think about community and human-centered design. Everything changes, right? And that's the experience that my client had. And it's fascinating. More and more people are getting turned on to this, James. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah, amazing. Look, I mean, it's so it's almost like dropping a zero, because you're 30 to 50 years out, and it's normally working with businesses 3 to 5. And I mean, I find is there's often, like in startup world, we're talking like 5-10 people in the business or whatever. It's very easy to conflate the journey of the founder and the journey of the business. And that's kind of almost one of the first exercises is trying to, you are not the art, separating the art from the artist type thing. You've got to kind of get them to realize that what their journey is and what the potential for the business is, two very different things.
And what the potential for the world is, and what the potential for humanity is, and what the potential for your competition is as well. Right, I talk about the non-zero sum game in my book, and it's like just let it go. Realize that some people are going to do really good alongside you doing really good as well. You know what? Be friends with them. Work together.
I used to have a file called competitors, and now I call it collaborators, because I'm
that's exactly right.
That I should probably reach out to.
Yeah, and these people really do want to chat. I mean, I'm doing tons of work with banks this year, and it's basically, partner organizations bringing all of the banks to sit in the same room and work together. That's incredibly progressive. It's better for everyone. Everyone's going to win, and especially we're going to win, the people that use the bank. So it's interesting times, right? And there's this shift. It's sort of really, it's so essential. But there's a lot of inertia in the world as well that we have to sort of fight through.
Yeah. So you talk about utopia, dystopia, like what, and like you define whose utopia it is. Can you give us a bit of an insight into that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I sort of talk about positive and dystopian futures. Another event that I started about 6-7 years ago was Dark Futures. It was known as the Black Mirror of TED Talks, and it was like the darker side of the world, what's happening behind the scenes. And we kicked that off with 4 amazing speakers, and we've done events in San Francisco, Vancouver, and Toronto. Just as the pandemic was about to hit, we were going to take it to New York City and London as well. Maybe that will come back. But, positive futures, I feel, and it's biased to the way that I feel, but this is kind of how I think the world needs to feel as well. So positive futures, imagines a world where we have a global view. There's infrastructure to support improving health and wellness and reducing wealth disparity. We're in a world of health, humanity-centric, balanced and egalitarian solutions to the greatest challenges that we face. Around climate change, water, energy, food, challenges, waste, a whole number of different areas, which are inherently dystopian and caused by the last 300 years of the Industrial Revolution. And we're caught in this industrial complex. And I always start off my keynotes by saying, this is how we got to here today. A lot of people were very greedy. And this is kind of like the basis of what dystopian futures are. So if we start from today and we say, okay, dystopian futures, it's a world where we perpetuate the reliance on the industrial complex. So all of those innovations that are owned by so few people around energy, predominantly fossil fuels, hopefully moving to renewable energy. Transportation, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there around automation and communication information. So those three dimensions have been where all the big developments, and the cross section between them is where the acceleration of GDP, population growth, large scale food systems, mega cities or whatever come from, right? But the industrial complex is ultimately, and this is part of the dystopia, there's military action and conflict that supports it. There's billionaires and shareholders that are rewarded ahead of us, the people that consume anything. The technology solutions and platforms put out there are promised to do something great, but we're reduced to users. It's a world of short-term thinking and greed. It's about personal protectionism. It's not about these open systems that everyone can gain access and control of, right? And we're starting to see that sort of play out, and some of those big discussions happen today. So, that's the way I see it. Some people that work in those dystopian industries think that's a positive future, but ultimately we're being lied to. So there's some activism in there to say we want positive futures. And I always say that futurism is activism. We got to stand up and fight.
Awesome. And look, and we had a sort of brief chat before this about I got quite wrapped up, and we shared disc profiles, and it would support our disc profiles. You're more red, I'm more yellow. That I got caught up in the abundance movement. I went out to Peter Diamandis' Abundance 360 event, Singularity University, done that quite a bit, and then I had even done dinners to discuss abundance and where it's taken us. And abundance isn't obviously always a good thing, but I find it was almost jarring when I started reading your book, and you pretty much convinced me by the end, and I started to see examples of where understanding how dystopia might be allows us to almost not get there, right?
Right, exactly.
It's a really, really, but it's horrible. It's not no one wants to go there, right?
Yeah, and the abundant look, I don't dislike the idea of abundance. I do dislike that basically it's been framed in a way that the people that can afford to be part of the movement are part of the movement, right? We talk about, access to solutions affecting 1 billion lives and all the good stuff, moonshots. It's also super interesting that most of the big tech players in the world don't care anymore. Just from hearing what's been going on in Silicon Valley and all the layoffs and whatever, it's not just the people that were hired in the pandemic that are being laid off. It's designers, futurists and foresight practitioners, people that are actually trying to move a company forward in the right direction. And all of these big tech companies, without fail, they're canning the projects that really matter in terms of creating something around protecting ethics and against bias in data. I can't say to what extent in all places, but there's been a worrying trend that a friend of mine says the future has been cancelled by a lot of the big tech players, right? So abundance is sort of a buzzword to me these days. And sure, Singularity University and Mr. Diamandis and all those other guys, fine. I don't think it goes far enough. I think that there's a lot of struggles out in the world, and I think that the grassroots movements that are needed have to influence, the conversations that are happening at the big tables that are making decisions governmentally around policy, globally around collaboration, looking at UN and World Economic Forum and whatever. And we got to start turning the screws and really pushing people to really think about what an even basic sense of respect for humanity looks like. And then maybe once we get to some of those basics, we can think about abundance, right?
Yeah. Look, I did realize, about halfway through that some of the best sessions I've done with some of my old teams is how do we screw this up? And we write every single way how we could screw, whatever we're trying to do up. Really easy to find the answers to well, don't do this, don't do that. So I was oh, hang on. I have been able to go there, but I also really align to what is it, Henry Ford, who says whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. So we've got this, there's almost sort of a bit of a brainwashing there's some unlearning to do.
Yeah, Alvin Toffler very famously said, literacy, and I'm paraphrasing, Modern literacy is about being able to unlearn and relearn.
Yeah.
We're sort. I always say that nostalgia is the enemy of good futures work, right? We gotta stop, waxing lyrical about what our forefathers and foremothers did before us and how good that was, and the good old days and how we got to today. Because ultimately, these ideas and these structures, these business models, a lot of them deserve to be hung out to dry and completely revolutionized, right? And it's interesting, in the early 90s to the late 90s, we saw a huge boom, internet businesses, a dot-com boom, and that crashed and burned. And then, in the 2000s, it came back strong with vigor. And it seemed like there was a lot of progress. And then once these companies made a lot of money, it seemed there was a lot of protectionism, right? So we're kind of in that world. And if we think about the companies that are protecting themselves today, they're just trying to make as much money as possible rather than trying to work out how to spend as much money as possible to make a huge difference in the world. So I think that's how companies are going to be measured in the next sort of 20 to 30 years.
Okay. Well, yeah, look, I mean, having started, I've tried a few times to write a book. Like, I'm on about 35,000 words at the moment.
Wow.
So maybe Congrats. I need to go out to Joshua Tree to finish mine. Did you set out with a vision of what what was the change you wanted to make in the world as a result of your book?
Yeah, so I'd written about 10 book outlines before this one, right? And I know that, what is it, that what's the best way to deal with writing with a book? It's write the book, right? And I was really lucky. So there was a book called The Future Starts Now, and it was a bunch of guest lectures or guest sort of opinion pieces that was put together by a couple of friends called Bronwyn Williams in South Africa, who's part of the Futurist think tank, and Theo Priestley, that's doing some really cool stuff with regards to game mechanics. And they invited me, and Bloomsbury, the publisher out of the UK, they made my start with dystopia 1,500 word article the opening chapter. So, okay. And I've been playing with this, and I've been doing dark futures for a number of years. And it's like, what? Sometimes these ideas stick, and sometimes people get excited. And it's like, okay, there's some oxygen being given to this. And I chatted to the editor, Matt, and I said, I've got an idea for a book. Can I pitch it to you? He goes, yeah, here's the format. Write this. This is what we're looking for. He kind of liked my original pitch. And I wrote it, and it was in, I think it was January 2021. And sort of after that first year of the pandemic, I'd done a ton of work, loads of consultancy was happening, all of my frameworks and ideas, my mind was just on fire. I just had a kid, a whole bunch of stuff had happened. And then
lacking lots of sleep,
lacking lots of sleep, hallucinating, the whole thing. So I sat down and I said, Matt, what do you think? And he goes, I love it. Let me take it to the board, like the board, editorial board. And they loved it. And we signed that contract in March 2021. And I was like, okay, I need to write a book now. So I actually spent the first few months just researching. So I had significant documents, I just used Google Docs and whatever, to collect all of my ideas. And we're talking hundreds of pages of references and stories, my own work, and a whole number of different things. And by sort of the end of 2021, my partner and I were pretty fed up with being stuck in Toronto, and it was pretty bad during the pandemic, and the lockdowns here were some of the worst in North America. And I was like, her parents had a 2-bedroom place in Palm Desert, and we went to live there. There was a swimming pool. It was sunny every day. I made friends with the local economic partnership down there, Coachella Valley Economic Partnership. And I went along to, they had this iHub, the Palm Desert iHub. And it was like a 10-minute walk from where I was living, which doesn't really happen down in that part of the world. You basically have to drive everywhere. I walked in, it was a completely new facility and it was empty. And Laura James there was like, yeah, we love what you're doing. Which office do you want to use? I'm like, and I was willing to give them money. They're like, no, just come and speak at one of our conferences. And I was like, sure. And I sat there for 3 months. And in 50 days, I banged out about 86,000 words, which is going apace. But, I'd spent months sort of jotting down ideas and, Big respect to my partner who had patience with me, because I'd literally be middle of dinner and be like, I just need to write something down. I'd be like on phone. And so banged that out. Yeah. So came back to Toronto, went into another set of lockdowns. We almost lost our mind, and basically started the editorial process on this, reduced it down by about 25,000 words, took out an entire chapter of design fiction that I might release on futurist.com at some point. And focus it in, and got to the point where it was released February this year, and on Valentine's Day. And a romantic novel about dystopia.
Made with a lot of love.
Made with a lot of love. And it came out, and it became a bestseller here in Canada. It became a hot new release in the US. It's getting onto lots of well-known book lists and whatever. Lots of people are sort of saying it's pretty cool. So I'm excited, because this means that people are paying attention to foresight, sometimes for the first time, and are starting to think about what that means in their business. And that's why I sort of say, James, put futurist on your profile. I want everyone to be a futurist. I don't care if you just consider, one what if statement, question every day, or you see some cool tech and you want to chat to people about it. Let's go. This is the time to do that.
No, awesome, man. Yeah, look, I mean, it's set an intention, isn't it? And then you then work out how to get there. So
yeah.
Look, so moving the discussion on a bit into the sort of AI world, like I am absolutely blown away by GPT and and something I've been playing a bit with Midjourney, and I'm like, oh my god, there's just all this stuff that didn't exist effectively 4 months ago. Some of it did, but not very well. The chat interface, there's a lot to do with the interface that makes a big difference, because it's the conversational way that you interact with it is just groundbreaking. But so we can talk about the positive side, but let's go straight to, are we sleepwalking into dystopia with AI?
So it's really interesting, right? You've got, since science fiction has sort of demonized the idea of robotic overlords, it's a continuation of that as new technology comes in, and we've all been touched with AI. If you're watching this on LinkedIn uses, machine learning systems in the back end. Gmail does. We've all been touched by it. That's what I find interesting and impactful about AI. Then we have these large language models that come in through ChatGPT 4 and 5's coming eventually, and a whole bunch of different things. And there's a lot of hype. And last year it was metaverse, and we need to be more critical in terms of the thinking around that. So that's what I try and do with my clients, and to sort of wake people up. And I get asked, last year I was being asked about metaverse all the time. This year I'm being asked about ChatGPT and generative AI. I actually do think that generative AI, whether that's from Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, or whatever, Adobe's just come up with something that's trying to catch up, or ChatGPT and a whole number of the other systems that are out there that are coming from Google, Meta, and whoever else. It's giving us progress. Everyone's hyped up like it's going to change the world. It's kind of just a remix of the world that we were already in. Right. It's like search on steroids. I've used it to write articles. The articles are very average. I actually, and my number one piece of advice for people using it is, find things, see what it says, use it for your research and understand that it's already been said. So don't say it. Go out and find your own unique opinion. The problem about it is you don't know where they got the information from and what constituted that. If you challenge it, you can literally get it to change its mind in a drop of a
same prompt, completely different response. It's bizarre.
So on futurist.com, I wrote my 2023 predictions. I sort of play with predictions on a year-to-year basis. You can kind of, what people are going to do in that sort of short time scale, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to take the same prompt and I'm going to plug it into GPT-4 versus GPT-3. And it was the absolute same answer. So there's even this like PR and spin that's happening now, that suddenly there is progress. It is suddenly more powerful. No, the hype is more powerful right now. The amount of evangelists in the world need to calm down and really realize what this is doing. saying things, and this is sort of an enemy of good futures worker. It's going to change everything. It's the future of X. It's the future of Y. I was working with a bank last week, and it's like, you need to be wildly careful of this. This is a race to the bottom, a race to a homogenous user experience. I'm sure you can train it, but what are we doing? You're literally building, a data set for reference that can be useful. It's not going to change the world. A lot of people online are probably mad at me for saying that, right? It can help with productivity, no doubt. If you're coding, doing some brand work, and great. There's some people that have written books using it, and they're terrible books. The predictions article that I got it to write was kind of super average and not really unique, right?
Yeah.
I think it's search on steroids. I think it's a mirror of what's already been said. I think it can waste a huge amount of your time. So I think everyone, once they finish playing around for a little while with ChatGPT, they're always going to go back to secondary research. They're always going to do the human thing of working out how to connect all the different points. But there's a huge caveat with this. You can't just take it verbatim, because it can be wildly wrong, inaccurate. It can miss important parts of information and context. We've still got a long way to go.
You need to know that is I'd say the key bit is you need to know whether what is given you is good or not.
Yeah. And prompt engineers getting paid $300,000. What a load of hype.
Only for another few months, because it will work out how to do the prompt for you.
Okay, if anyone online makes $300,000 a year being a prompt engineer, email me. I'd like to
put your name in the
I honestly don't believe that exists. The media loves this, right? It's all about clicks and selling advertising. That's the best thing ChatGPT's done for modern business. It's driven a huge amount of internet traffic to drive advertising revenue. But I'm not discounting this totally. I really am not. It's really important. It's really dangerous from a misinformation perspective. It's going to be part of our world. It's a productivity tool. I'm
on the abundant side of things always. Remember, I am blown over by how much more productive it allows a small team to be, because suddenly we've got kind of the hive mind to go and we're in meetings and we're just well, let's just ask this, ask it the question and see what it comes back with. It's well, that's not half bad. You could delete half of that, take that, and then expand this.
Understand.
Unbelievable, what that means when
for sure.
Before anyway, so let's move on. I think that
for sure.
It also depends on where you're starting from. So some people are really good at content, or some. I definitely got a sort of a bit of a dyslexic vibe going on. So having something that just tweaks what I've said but puts it in, I'm this is incredible, because it's always been a stumbling block for me personally.
Yeah, I had another friend, a great friend of mine called JP Haleka, that said that, and it was I get it. There are some use cases. It's solid.
Yeah,
solid. I just did a piece of research with a client it took about 6 weeks, and they were doing the predominant research, and I was coaching around futures and scenarios, and looking for how to look in sort of the dark corners of different industries, right? And we came to an opinion, and the opinion was not going to be very popular with the people we had to present it to. They believed that the future is X. And we were it's not that simple. And there's all of these stumbling blocks, and it's unlikely. Mm-hmm. And once we'd done the work, it's you know what? I'm just gonna put in our questions, things that question our hypothesis into ChatGPT, and it corroborated everything that we'd done in terms of thinking about it. It didn't expand our work or anything like that. It didn't find things that we didn't find, but it was oh yeah. It's reflecting that. So you can say that there are a lot of people out in the world that are being referenced. We don't know who they are, that are also agreeing with us as well. And we even submitted that as part of the work to say, we did this work and we ran this, and that it's interesting to see. And as a persuasion device, it can be powerful, right? So No,
it's super interesting. I mean, I don't know if you sort of keep your sort of eye on UK sort of politics. You've obviously had things going on with Brexit and whatnot, and the EU have becoming much more protectionist on this. The UK at the moment just released a white paper on AI regulation, saying they're not going to have any new enforcement powers. So, like, what are your thoughts on that? So super loose, basically. Go for it.
Yeah. Boundaries. Tech companies and research, especially in these areas, aren't set with boundaries, and we see this big petition. Let's have a petition and stop everything for 6 months. It's the most inane thing I think I've seen in modern years. We'll just stop for 6 months whilst we consider what? What are you going to consider? Like consider getting all of these companies to hire back all the people that they fired that were working in AI ethics and bias and a whole number of different things. Like we're in the Wild West right now. Regulation can never catch up to the speed of these tech companies. I actually did some work around predictive policy and regulation. The idea that you can actually work with these companies to understand where they're going and actually start to draft policy and regulation so that when this comes in, we know the guardrails. We also need to understand that in the world that, there really is no boundary between countries. And sure, in the Western world, we're like, let's just stop for 6 months. No one else is stopping for 6 months, right? So what, you lose competitive advantage? I think the British government came out. I'm a Brit, but I'm sort of naturalized Canadian as well. I'm probably not going to live back in the UK again anytime soon.
You can say what you're about to say.
It's fine, yeah. Well, they came out with some strange sort of social media post, Rishi Sunak, and it's like, we're gonna like supercharge, technological innovation. That, And what was it? We're gonna put 340 million pounds behind it, or something like that. And it was like, okay, so that's like the burn rate of like a quarter for some of this stuff. For one tech company or something like that, right? I get it. Government's never going to catch up in this problem. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, Denmark actually created the role of an ambassador to Silicon Valley. So they had this guy that was in Silicon Valley, making friends with all the companies, knowing what was coming next, and then feeding that back into government policy and regulations thinking. That's kind of brilliant, right?
Yeah, that's clever.
It's also worrying that, you've got these big tech companies and the lobbying, the lobbyists. I
was going to say, it depends which direction it is. If it's lobbying, that's different. If it's understanding, then that's.
I don't think tech companies want to be bad. I just think that they've got a problem with the fact that they have to make as much money as possible, and they have to default to selling advertising or monetizing the user. And as soon as things get tough, shareholders get jittery, and they literally, take the futures dog outside and shoot it by the bike shed. It's like, and I think that there's a great miss right now. What is kind of cool and what's happening right now in the world, James, is all of these, things like Google X or some of the innovation futures labs in Amazon or Meta or Google or whatever. All of these people are going to be out in the wild now, and they're going to work together. They're going to produce some really cool stuff. And, things like OpenAI came from people that came from these companies, right? And then, they might as well like kill the idea that it's open because Microsoft just gave them like $1 gazillion, right? So, I mean, there's some really cool stuff that's going to be coming because there's sort of a revolt because these big tech companies they're just trying to make as much money as possible. I think you're going to see their products deteriorate. And I do think that there's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be some really cool stuff coming. Some of that's going to be related to generative AI. Some of it's going to be related to mobile, new kinds of devices, even augmented reality and whatever. And I just think it's going to really change the world. And then we'll be in the cycle of big tech companies acquiring those companies, subsuming them in the organization, rebranding them and pumping them back out into the world until we hit another cycle in the next 20 years where things get tight and they fire all the people again and start focusing back on selling more advertising. Right. I've spent time in the Valley. I've spent time with these companies. There are some really, really smart people in all these companies. So I'm not going to name these names and say that they're inherently bad. They're not. I just think that markets determine the fate of companies a little bit too much.
Okay, awesome. Look, love it. Let's just try and pull things back a bit
sure.
towards the book. So like some key concepts for me, like what is versus what if, and
Yes.
not conflating, the two. So what is versus what to do about it. Like just explain that a bit more, and how do you resist the temptation?
Yeah, so I read a great book by Rob Hopkins, is a British guy from, I think, from Devon, called "From What Is to What If," and it came at a time when I was very much evangelizing futures work and saying, "Welcome to the future," and take some questions and go home, and it wasn't an invitation to be curious. When I read Rob Hopkins' book, and it was on a flight down to New Orleans. Just the first chapter, like creativity and innovation, community, the invitation to be curious, using what if is really that invitation to stop focusing 100% on operations and making money and all the stresses of the day to day. Get your head up, look out to these future horizons, and wonder what comes next. What if the world operated differently? What if there were different dynamics between like governments and citizens? What if boundaries between countries truly were dropped? And what if there was global cooperation? What if there was more dynamics in global war? What if China, Iran, a whole bunch of different countries, secede from the International Monetary Fund? What if, all of these things is really potent to start playing with. So that's a really cool concept. If you just think about that after reading the book more than anything else, and then go and read Rob Hopkins' book as well, you'll realize that you can actually do a lot just by asking simple questions in terms of futures work.
Yeah. Is this a good point to look at some of the what if predictions, like are there
Sure.
are there signals that you're seeing? Let's go to 2040. Like what are some of the things that may be happening in hopefully our lifetime?
So futurists don't predict, and people, I talk about predictions in like 1 or 2 years, sometimes once a year in a blog post, and I've done that for a long time. It's interesting, that you can pretty much see the obvious things that are coming around the corner. Things like, will GPT-4 be more capable by the end of 2023? Yes. As will Midjourney, as will a number of different things. Will we come out of this global recession by 2024? Well, it's likely, right? When we start to look at the 2040s and we start looking ahead like 15, 20 years, we're speculating. We're not doing anything more strongly than that. But the speculation means that it's a discussion rather than sort of putting your money on a horse that's going to win the race in those futures as well. The things that I look at today, and I talk about this in the book, is around water, energy, food nexus, water scarcity, renewable energy transition, at scale food production, especially within the context of the burgeoning mega cities that are growing around the world in Southeast Asia, Africa, and whatever. And then also I look at waste as well. When you start to realize that, the total mass of all novel materials like plastics in the world is twice that of all living mammals, it's a worrying situation, right? So I kind of hope that by the time we get to 2040, there are a number of global programs of cooperation in place to ensure the availability of water, renewable, abundant energy transmitted around the planet in global supergrids. One of the things I speculate about, and there's already work and signals happening around that. And then actually working out how we can produce food in different ways, especially in an urban context as well. And we're seeing everything from, systems that use less water. Think about it. We flush our toilets with drinking water. Just think about that, right? Yeah. I live in Canada. 21% of the world's fresh water is in Canada. The future of water tankers more than oil tankers, renewable energy, and what we're doing to replace fossil fuels in the world, which is going to happen. We're starting to see big signals, especially in the Middle East, where they're investing in tech, because they know that oil is going to be a marginal product in the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And when we start thinking about food, cellular agriculture, vertical farming at scale, being able to grow more resistance and heat resistant and resilient crops in the face of more extreme weather conditions and heat as well. We've seen a lot of big troubles happening in Southern Europe in the last couple of years. I mean, imagine if Italy gets so hot that you can no longer grow tomatoes. It's a cultural catastrophe as much as it is like a food catastrophe, right? Yeah. So you know, by 2040, the world's going to be a pretty funky place. Population is going to be big. It's probably going to be, you know, nearly 1 billion more people than where we are today. There's going to be more strains on all the systems. Just from a climate perspective, it's just going to be a really weird place to be. It's going to be a really tough place to be in places that are already feeling like things are getting warmer, right? So, you know, and what we can do is these visions, we can start to speculate, you know, what technologies are going to help us, what kind of, you know, societal, cultural shifts need to happen to help us really work things out. Who's going to be in charge of the world? Are all of these old white guys, or, you know, old guys that are in charge of economies and countries, are they going to be pushed out of the way in terms of, you know, people that are, you know, care more about the world, like women, you know, being in charge of the world, maybe, you know? It's like, yeah. So, you know, I speculate on the positive side of things on where we're going, but, you know, again, with that dystopian anchor, if we don't make decisions and we don't, you know, break the chains of this industrial complex, we're going to be in stasis and not really go anywhere. In fact, we're going to be in a worse off position.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying in there that, what is it? Progress happens one funeral at a time, or whatever. So we're kind of. That's
a great quote.
Yeah. It's sure. the sort of journey we're on. Yeah. It's just hard hearing it, isn't it? Like, for people.
Well, wasn't it like Churchill that said, like, success is going from failure to failure? You know, it's just like resiliency. It's kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think more than anything else, and this has sort of been beaten to death as an idea, resiliency and stamina. Like, I talk about stamina. It takes a lot to keep going, and it's easy to give up. So, you know, I think everyone listen, just stand by your values, you know, push forward, be activistic, and like, you know, hopefully people will start listening. I think election cycles kill a lot, you know, in terms of like, here's the promises for the next 4 years. I was speaking at a conference in Scottsdale, Arizona last year, and one of the speakers and the guy that endorsed my book is Paul Polman. And he's the global CEO of Unilever. Wildly powerful guy. Huge respect for him. Incredible guy. He's the co-founder and chair of an organization called Imagine that's really helping sort of bring people together and get very significant leaders around the world sort of behind these big changes. He shared this one stat. Long-term performance, I think it was in North America, for a CEO, that you're rewarded on, so bonuses for long-term performance, I think it was an average of 1.3 years. We've got it wrong. Got it wrong. And you know, and you cut to Asia. I think it was a friend of mine, Monica Bilskite, that said, you know, Asia thinks in millennia. You know, you've got people like Masayoshi Son, and everyone's like, oh, he's lost all this money trying to like fund WeWork or whatever. He's got a 300-year strategic plan.
Yeah.
Right. And he's like building companies that are going to shore up his business in the next 35 years that will be resilient for the next, you know, sort of 270 beyond that. You know, you got businesses in Japan that are 1,400 years old. You know, there's a spiritual side to all of this. And there's also like commitment and stamina in the West that we don't have. You know, and this is why, you know, people point at China. China's dominant because of their commitment and their stamina. I mean, totalitarian regimes can certainly move a population in one direction very quickly as well, right? So I'm not saying it's all roses or necessarily a good example of how to do it, but it's interesting. It's very, very interesting.
So I mean, we could push out by 10 years, but are there any sort of big changes? 10 years after that, 2050.
Well, this is it. More of the same, more acceleration. And what we see, like, once you go through an epoch of change, and so, let's assume 2040, we're in a world, renewable energy is dominant. We've got more egalitarian systems, and politics has calmed down a little bit more women are in charge of the world or whatever. 2050 is just an acceleration of that, right? Sure, technology is going to progress, you know. Where's that going to take us? Is that going to take us to a world where we don't see technology anymore? it becomes invisible? Does it take us to a world where we're strapped into the matrix and we never leave our apartments, right? Who knows, right? But it's interesting to play with all of these ideas, right? I kind of hope in 2050, am I going to make it to 2050? I'm 50 years old now. You know, I might make it to 2050. We might have to do this chat in 2050. What do you think?
Let's do
that.
On that. So I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
April the 5th, 2050.
5th of April, 2050. Right.
I might not be able to speak, but I'll have an
diary, and I'm going to invite you. Right.
Yeah.
On Zoom,
I'll have an EEG on my head, and you'll be able to what's going on.
You'll still have that background, though, won't you? And I'll still be wearing this Manic Miner top.
Exactly. Well, exactly. Manic Miner. I was going to say, man.
Yeah. Pretty classic.
Yeah, for sure.
I
think that was like the first game I played on the BBC when I was like young. Anyway.
Yeah. I think I'm about 3 years younger than you, but my sister's my closest sister in age 6 years older, so she had it, and I just really loved it. So for sure, right? Same experience. So let's and then bring it back to 2030. So what can we do in 2030 to try and get like a brighter 2040, 2050?
You know, I mean, we got to kind of start today, right? I mean, we're running out of time.
Don't wait until 2030.
7.5 years. So what are we going to achieve in the next 7.5 years? If we can work out a way to dial down the noise and focus on the right kinds of problems in the world just in the next 7 years and come to some consensus that we all have to move together globally in a collaborative way, that's going to be a huge win, right? And I'm talking about that water, energy, food nexus, waste, climate change. I mean, climate is changing. It's going to continue to change. It's just by how much, right? Humans and humanity is incredibly resilient. You know, we've had terrible times in the past. I wrote about this on my blog. I found this amazing story. It didn't make it into the book because I found it after my book. That's one tip about writing a book. You're going to find the best content for your book like in the months after writing it, right? I think it was like 547. I think it was around about that year. Maybe slightly off in my timing. There are a set of cataclysmic volcanic explosions around the world that literally plunged the world into some sort of volcanic winter for about 3 to 5 years, and caused like pestilence and famine and a bunch of stuff, proper biblical stuff.
Yeah, we're made about
And do you know what? We didn't fail to survive. Yeah, a lot of people died. You know, but humanity, it always finds a way. What is it, like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park? You know, nature always finds a way. Humanity always finds a way. So we shouldn't underestimate the power of who we are and what we can do. There's a lot of suffering, unfortunately, along the way, and you know, one of the biggest things that we need to deal with, and it's one of the most unspoken things in a lot of business and organization contexts, is the multi-generational trauma that we have to heal in the world so that we can move forward, right?
Yeah, I remember that in your book. It's the challenge we have is we're not necessarily equipped with the tools to, or you know, you have to acknowledge that it exists in the first place to start to do something about it, right?
Exactly. I worked with a workers' insurance company a few years ago, and I'd just undergone some treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, I'm super excited to talk about this. And they were like, you can't talk about PTSD. I'm like, what? They go, we don't recognize that as a problem. It's like, but it is. They're like, we don't recognize that as a problem. It's like inconvenience, you know? Anyway.
Yeah.
I think there's another conversation we can have in a couple of months.
We'll have that in 2050.
Yeah, multi-generational trauma, and
we might just about be ready to accept it.
And healing the inner child.
Yeah.
That comes back to stamina and resiliency in futures work as well. It's incredibly important.
So to I suppose bring us back for a lot of the listeners will be, you know, founders, CEOs, MDs of startups, smaller organizations. How do we bring it back? You know, you do talk about Johari window and in things, but how do we practically bring it back so the business can design the future that they desire?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. You can start scanning for signals today and start imagining what trends emerge from that. You can start thinking about scenarios. It's super easy. Actually, if you go to futurist.com/kickstart, there's a whole bunch of tools that I've done. I share these in my keynotes. So if you go there, so futurist.com/kickstart, and we can always add that to the event as well. In the chat, that just gives you a number of things you can do on a daily basis. It also automates everything. So you can use existing systems like Google Alerts and whatever. There's some great forums like Reddit /r/futurology. Lots of people sharing ideas. Going out there and just like having all of these signals come to you. And you just like skim through things every single day. And it's like how I do scanning. Just awareness, right? And start thinking about what it means to your business. And then just ask yourself the simple question, like, what if this catches fire and it's got a bearing on my business or the people that I sell to, work with, offer services to, or it's got a bearing on their lives. And just doing that on a daily basis is going to sort of work that, that futures muscle. And you end up becoming really aware. And you're going to feel a bit conflicted on at times, but work through that and just get that awareness. And that's going to be really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's, they say that the best productivity app on your phone is airplane mode. So it's making time how to reflect. And
that's amazing. Yeah, for sure. 100%.
We do have a question, actually. Sal's asked, he's asked, well, basically, I have a question around how to utilize these insights for abundance and the great economic return, which I guess is what a lot of people are looking for. Words like return. It assumes we've lost all hope and everything's gone to hell. Like, it's just a shift, right? It's just a shift in a little direction. Using these tools for abundance, putting humanity at the center of your intention is the most important thing. If we can refocus abundance around, that positive idea of providing a world where, poverty and scarcity are no longer issues, and it's done in a way that doesn't cost everyone a bunch of money, and it's available. Starting to sound like a socialist, but like, this is it, right? That's what I mean. More socialistic systems, and I don't mean that from a militant perspective. I mean that from a caring about your community, your family a little bit more, and the world that we live in. Yeah. What if we don't face our futures, especially in business?
So it's easy, right? You can choose to do futures work and be a part of that process of thinking about how the world is going to be a better place, or you can be a bystander and just watch everyone else take advantage of working at that. Because I mean, there's a study by Rohrbeck and Kuhn in 2018, and over a period of I think about 5 years, they found that the companies that have focused on vigilance around signal scanning, scenario planning, risk anticipation, they built that into their business, were 33% more profitable, and they had 200% higher growth than those that didn't. So you're always going to be in the position. If you don't want to do it, walk away from this conversation, do nothing. And see the people that are doing something, and look at the delta in 5 years' time. I guarantee you might have a few more pennies in the bank than some people, but you're not going to be in a good position to really survive for the next like 20 to 50 years beyond that. So
yeah, amazing. Yeah, I know I'm coming out with sayings, but there's a final one, which is not the world we leave for our children, but the children we leave for our world. And so
yes, amazing.
Yeah,
all that wisdom is great. I love it.
But it is, isn't it? How do we teach the next generation this? Why isn't it in our schooling? What's it's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I wasn't going to have children, and I met a great friend of mine. He does futures work with me. In fact, we started a lot of futures work together, and I was like, oh, I thought you'd never have kids. You didn't seem like the kind of guy I did. He goes, well, it kind of, happened in an unorthodox way, and we weren't expecting it. But, who's going to save the world? That's it.
Amazing.
And I've got a 2.5-year-old I need to train to save the world now, right? So.
Yeah. Sounds like we've got similar age kids. It's it definitely changes your perspective on what's going on in the world. So
yeah.
Hey, look,
for sure.
Time's up. Any sort of closing thought you want to leave for listeners?
You know what? Like, anyone can reach out to me and just have a conversation. I'm super into that. You know, you can see I've written tons of articles at nikolasbadminton.com, futurist.com. A shameless promo, you know, buy the book, you know.
Get the book.
Get the book. Listen to listen to the audio version. Luckily I didn't have to record that. So you get to listen to someone more erudite than myself.
Actually, towards the end, that's what I went and bought it and just listened to it, because I was like, you know, I could do it doing other stuff. So that's actually much better like that. So
and you know what? Take chances, never be afraid, never back down. And remember that futurism is activism.
Amazing. Thank you. Right. So, you know, there it is. We're just on the hour. Make sure we put humanity before technology. I know that's a big theme in the book. Consider dystopian futures so we can create a utopian one, or something like that. If you aren't facing your future, are you becoming part of the past? Hopefully, you know, Nick today has helped you consider getting out there and facing yours. Next Wiser Wednesday, we have a scaling up expert, John Ratcliffe, who's going to be like chatting to us about his experience of scaling some, like, you know, big companies out there. Nick's already said, get in touch with him on LinkedIn. Thank you, Nick. Been amazing to chat to you today. Thank you to the audience for listening, and I hope everyone feels slightly wiser this Wednesday as a result of joining. Cheers.